Thank you so much, David. Really a wonderful honor for me to be able to have a chat here today with, yes, a hero to us all uh, in the space community, a longtime friend of mine, Lieutenant General John Shaw. John, thank you for being here.
Hey, Kim, it's terrific to see you, and I'm honored to be here myself, and I hope you can hear me okay. But
we got you loud and clear, 5 by 5.
Glad to be here.
General Shaw, let me take a minute and introduce you to our audience, and then we'll roll right into this. So Lieutenant General John Shaw is the Deputy Commander, U.S. Space Command. And U.S. Space Command is the unified command responsible for conducting operations in, from, and to space to deter conflict, and if necessary, defeat aggression, deliver space combat power for the joint combined force, and defend U.S. vital interests with allies and partners. Lieutenant General Shaw, prior to his current position, was dual-hatted as the commander, Combined Forces Space Component Command, U.S. Space Command, and Deputy Commander, Space Operations Command, U.S. Space Force, Vandenberg Space Force Base. He also served as the Deputy Commander of Air Force Space Command, United States Air Force, before we had a Space Force. And that is where I had the distinct honor to work with General Shaw for many years. General Shaw entered the Air Force in 1990 as a distinguished graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy with a degree in astronautical engineering and a minor in Russian language. He served in a variety of air and space operations and staff positions. General Shaw, it's certainly a great pleasure to have you here with us today as we get into a very interesting topic, maintaining subcritical mass, securing the heavens as human activities gravitate spaceward. Thanks, John. I'm going to turn it over to you to get us started.
Thanks, Kim. Hey, I didn't come up with that title, but I really like it.
Yeah.
Great. And by the way, I got to say, it's an honor to be. It's quite a lineup that that you all have put on here today, and I'm following some great minds there who just finished the last panel. I caught the last bit of it there, so I just recognize that and just honored to be here today. Hey, I think so. I know that a lot of the theme of class has been about how do we do national security and commercial and civil all together. And I think I would start by throwing something out there and see how what your audience thinks. And that is, I propose that we are at the beginning of the third space age. And that this third space age is going to be characterized by what I would call the conjunction of the space sectors. And I use the word conjunction deliberately too. It's a great space word, right? A lot of the folks are now thinking, they hear conjunction. Some of them are old enough, they're thinking Schoolhouse Rock or something like that. But conjunction in the space business goes back to early astronomers, that reference to objects coming close together in the heavens, right? Jupiter in conjunction with Saturn. And so I think we're in the third space age, and I think the space sectors are in conjunction in ways they've never been before, and we are only beginning to see the tip of the iceberg in that regard. And so what do I mean by third space age? I'll just briefly talk about it. So the first space age, I think, characterized from the beginnings of space, wherever you want to draw that line, 1957, maybe a little bit earlier, to the end of the Cold War. And largely what happened in that first space age was largely civil with regard to our manned space program, with a few robotic platforms beginning to explore the solar system, and national security, which used space in a strategic sense to sort of get a better understanding of what was happening in the Soviet Union and better warn against strategic threats and the first development of strategic capabilities. And those were potentially under threat in the Cold War. But that went away pretty quickly. The Cold War ended and we entered the post-Cold War period. And from a space age perspective, I think we entered the second space age, which I think was characterized by rapid evolution in space capabilities across the sectors, but in a linear way. Commercial was very nascent in the first space age, and then the second space age, continue with mostly geosynchronous SATCOM. GPS was a big change where we kind of brought what was a national security capability into the commercial sphere. Civil kind of pivoted, right? We went from going to the moon to really focusing on low Earth orbit and doing that in an allied way and an international way with partners, and really started, we forget this, but we started in soon after the Cold War, a famous agreement signed between the United States and Russia to partner in space. And we started sending astronauts, American astronauts, to the Mir space station. And then we constructed the International Space Station as an effort, a partnership among many nations, with Russia being a big part of that. And national security kind of did a pivot in space in the second space age. We went from mostly strategic focus in space to driving space capabilities down to the tactical level. And really, the lion's share of my career was spent doing that, right? Making GPS as helpful as it could, be as helpful as it could to the joint warfighter, no matter where they were, making missile warning useful for more than just strategic missiles, right? And it was down to tactical missiles and other events, and using that capability and getting those notices to joint warfighters as quickly as we possibly could. And also all of that with the backdrop of operating in a benign domain where we were not under threat. So somewhere we entered the third space age. And that was true across all sectors. I can't give you an exact date. History doesn't like to do that. I do think it's helpful to kind of look at these, though, to look for patterns and context. But from a commercial perspective, it probably started somewhere in the 2015 timeframe when we saw reusable launch vehicles for the first time. An impressive nonlinear development in commercial space. We've seen the design and deployment of proliferated low Earth orbit constellations that I think are going to change in a nonlinear way how we do SATCOM in space as it's looking down to the Earth. And then on the civil side, we're going back to the moon, the pivot back to what we had done in the first space age, and all that. But we're going to do that with a much bigger team, international team, and we're going to do it to stay longer. And I think that's really exciting what NASA is doing, leading that charge. And then on the national security side, the big change is we are now facing threats in space in ways we never did before, and in greater variety and diversity than we ever faced near the end of the Cold War and that first space age. All of these things together have put us into a new age, but we're also seeing these sectors intersecting with one another in ways we have not seen before. And I'll give some examples. So NASA, as it pivoted to go to the moon, started the commercial crew program to sustain the ability to put astronauts in the International Space Station. That's a remarkable development, right? Sending astronauts to the space station on contract. Pretty remarkable. With regard to civil and national security, we're helping as NASA looks to go to the moon, continue to help them with space domain awareness and understanding what might be out there, and providing support where we can to astronauts as they launch and as they are recovered, as we've been doing from the very beginning in partnership with NASA. And then there's this interesting intersection that's growing all the time between commercial and national security. And just in the last week or so, it's reached this new threshold of threats against commercial, stated threats from a potential adversary against our commercial space systems. Never happened before, not that clear before, but now it is. And so whether they like it or not, commercial space companies can be drawn into national security situations, and we need to think about how we're going to address that moving forward. I should also say our national security efforts, whether it's intelligence or joint warfighting, are more reliant on commercial space capabilities than they've ever been before, and I don't see that slowing down either. So Kim, we're in the third space age. It's the conjunction of the space sectors, and we're only seeing the beginning. What more do we have to do to work together among all the sectors to achieve the synergy that our nation and its allies need for us to move forward and keep space safe and sustainable, and keep all of these efforts moving forward, commercial, civil, all the while making it a secure environment. So those are my opening remarks, and it's a lot of big ideas there, but I think it might be some interesting context for class and interesting context for further discourse as we go forward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for teeing that up, General Shaw. That you've made some really interesting points, and I think offered us some very keen insights. This whole idea that the conjunction of the three sectors, right? Commercial, civil, national security, all meeting up in a place that in this third space age, we talk about this a lot, right? You mentioned it. We are much more contested, right? We're no longer benign. We don't have the backdrop of the benign environment. It's a contested environment. We have adversaries that are competing with us in space, that are threatening our national security, space superiority, that are threatening our commercial capabilities and civil capabilities. So it's contested. And it's congested. You know, we talk a lot about that. We talk about how there's so much growth, the exponential growth in commercial capabilities. Talk about reuse technology advancements have helped enable a reduction in the cost of launch. So we see much more capabilities being launched into space. We see nanotechnology that has helped us shrink those satellites down, improvements in how we manufacture these components to be much lighter in terms of size, weight, and the draw on power. More capabilities going up into LEO, proliferated LEO, much more congestion in that environment, and a lot of complexity, right? A lot of complexity as these three space sectors, interact with each other. In some ways, to much of a positive benefit, a positive outcome, but in many ways, in some ways, really creating some concerns and some consequences that we really have to think through. So let's tee all that up. Let's unpack some of this a little bit more. You've given us a lot to work with here. And I love the idea of it being really a conjunction, right? The things sort of coming together in ways that could really create something interesting, but also something of a real challenge. So first question. Well, you touched on this a little bit when you talked about the interaction of commercial and the importance of commercial as it relates to the space domain and touching these other sectors. We know that for some time there's been a lot of discussion of the Department of Commerce, right? That really wants to promote commercial activity in space, but the Department of Commerce taking a larger role in helping to manage the traffic, manage the congestion of this environment. Do you see this as a good thing? What challenges do you see, particularly for the DoD, encountering with this transition? Because DoD has been predominantly responsible for space traffic management. As we look to the Department of Commerce to take this on, how do you see this playing out?
Yeah, so I think the time is right, and I'll explain why in a second. I feel like I say, how do we have to just sort of say, how did we get here? Why is the Department of Defense the one organization right now that is essentially doing hazard avoidance, right? The vast majority of the 47,000 plus objects that we are tracking today, the Department of Defense, are debris. They are not active satellites. They're either dead satellites or pieces of satellites that are up there. It's mostly hazard mitigation. Why are we doing it? Because we've been doing it from the beginning. From that first space age, when it was pretty sparse up there, right? It was just national security capabilities, mostly a little bit of civil and scientific. That's how we started tracking. The Department of Defense had those capabilities to look out there and see what was there, and we've just gotten better and better and better at doing that as it's gotten, as you said, more and more congested. But it's time to kind of hand this to an organization that's probably going to be better to do this as it becomes even more challenging and the actors become more diverse up there. I like to say that the first space age, the space domain of the first space age was similar to the Arctic Ocean, right? Just a few platforms operating up there, mostly, exploratory, as I laid that out with civil space as the analog there, and some national security capabilities, kind of patrolling and making sure that, that we had a decent idea what was going on in the Arctic Ocean. The space domain of the third space age, Kim, is more like the Mediterranean. It is just packed with all sorts of actors of all different sizes from all different organizations and countries, and a lot of it being commercial. And so we're in a different age, and it's time for a different organization to take on the responsibility of working to avoid navigational hazards. You know, the vast majority, almost everybody operating up there doesn't want to run into something. They don't want to. Maybe I could work this one by analogy too. So when our republic was first founded, one of the challenges we had was charting the eastern seaboard, right? And it wasn't like you chart it once and you were done. You know, there were shifting sands and shifting currents and such. It was a continual process, and it needed to be done because there was danger, right? There's dangers of navigation hazards all along the eastern seaboard of the United States. Who had that job when the republic was founded? The United States Navy. But at some point, and the parallels are immense. We don't have a chance to go through them here. It was in 1807 that by an act of Congress endorsed by President Thomas Jefferson at the time, that the Office of Geodetic Survey was stood up in what is now NOAA today in our nation. And they got the responsibility to continually survey the eastern seaboard. And they ended up doing a pretty good job. It actually got handed back to the Navy sometime in the mid 1800s, and that lasted for 2 years because the Navy just struggled a little bit with that. It wasn't their primary mission, and they wanted to focus on other things. So it went back to this Office of Geodetic Survey. I just use that as a rough analogy of that's how we're normalizing things in the way we do governance in the space domain, and why I think a shift to Department of Commerce for space traffic management is the right thing to do at this point. One more analogy for the crowd if they're not convinced yet. We're doing the equivalent today with our Department of Defense as if we were doing air traffic control using AWACS aircraft. They could do it. They'd probably do a pretty decent job, but they probably need to be focused on doing some other things and let some other organization handle it from a regulatory perspective. And I think we're in the same position in space. And actually, I think that's a terrific thing. That means we've arrived. We're at a position where the space is the Mediterranean. It's got so many actors in it that we break to normalize it into a regulatory framework that really makes sense for us to keep moving forward.
Yeah, great analogies. I think we can all really get our head around that a bit. Do you see any challenges with making this transition, doing this handoff?
Yeah, we got to make sure we don't drop the ball is what it comes down to. I think Department of Commerce is going to end up being very, very good at this, but they're on a learning curve and a capability curve that we'll need to kind of walk with them along the way as a department. And of course, we won't stop being a customer or working with them even when they are handling space traffic management. We'll want to understand from Dark Defense, what are they seeing? What does that picture look like? The same way the United States Navy is interested in the maritime traffic picture wherever they might be operating for a number of reasons. And we'll do that together.
Oh, that's right. Absolutely. So you also mentioned, John Shaw, as we think about Department of Commerce taking on this role, they're ready to pick it up. DoD will be an active partner in handling that handoff in a smart and careful way, not dropping the ball. You mentioned that a key aspect of space traffic management, hazard avoidance, is dealing with the debris in space, not wanting to bump up against the debris in space. And we know what can cause quite a bit of debris in space is destructive anti-satellite testing. And we've seen some of that, unfortunately, occur recently, even this last year. And there's been a lot of discussion in the space community, certainly ever since Russia launched its ASAT last year, about the US placing a ban on destructive anti-satellite testing that can create dangerous debris and dangerous situation for all of the assets in space. How do you foresee that playing out over the coming years? And do you see destructive anti-satellite testing as one of the larger threats to space? Or is there something else?
So I do see that as being one of the threats of space, and we need to just stop. It needs to just stop. You know, the Chinese test in 2007, we are still tracking thousands of pieces of debris from that event because it was so high at well over 800 kilometers. The Russian test was a little bit lower at 550 kilometers, but we're still tracking hundreds and hundreds of pieces of debris, and many of them are going to be on orbit for a very long time. Those did not need to happen. You know, to be frank, we should realize we conducted our own satellite impact test back in 1985. And we saw really quick that that was a bad thing to do. We learned, and everyone else could have learned from that, and we haven't. The Russian activity was reckless and irresponsible back in November 15th of last year. I do think that with the Vice President's announcement earlier this year to a unilateral ban on voluntary ban on destructive direct descent ASAT testing was a form of leadership. It's like saying, we are not going to do this. Who's with us? And as of yesterday, just as of yesterday, Kim, I think Australia just joined on to be the 8th nation, 8 total now, that have signed on to this voluntary ban on destructive descent ASAT testing. I think that's going to gather momentum. It's a way of pointing out to leadership and how we're responsible in the domain, how we preserve this and sustain it for future generations. And I think it's a good move.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really is encouraging to see countries coming together around that. So let's shift a little bit to another important topic that we've heard a lot about and talked a lot about, a concerted effort in the DoD to implement Joint All-Domain Command and Control, JADC2, right? The concept that we've heard about is a way to improve warfighter operations in being able to actively integrate and share information across all domains, be able to move faster and command and control effectively all assets across all domains. How do you see the role of space with regards to JADC2? And assuming improved operations from JADC2, can you elaborate or provide examples on how you see this really coming together and what this might look like in the future, JADC2 and space having a role in that?
Yeah, I think where I usually like to take this, Kim, is to remind, people may think of space contributing into JADC2 or such, but we got to realize the U.S. Space Command is a huge customer of JADC2, meaning all domain command, control, and awareness, right? Space threats can come from any domain. I mean, threats to our space capabilities can come from any domain. They can come from in space. And we've seen the Russians do some things in low Earth orbit here in the last couple of years where they've come up close to some of our satellites, and that's concerning to us. They can come from the land domain in terms of direct descent ASAT. They can come from the sea domain in terms of a jammer aboard a ship. And they can come from the air domain in terms of an air-launched ASAT. And they can come, of course, and you know this as well as anyone, Kim, from the cyber domain. We are very, space and cyber, I like to say, are BFFs. And anything that is going to be a capability in the cyber domain against us can be an immediate threat to us. So we need JADC2 to kind of be able to do our job too, right? In the same way that we need to be able to provide and continue to provide space capabilities to the joint warfighter. We're probably short on time to really talk through it. I am definitely in those discussions at my level when we talk with the DepSecDef in our meetings or with the joint staff on how do we plug space into the overall all domain command control picture. It's more than just the terrestrial domains. It's absolutely space and cyber as well. So I just say we're a customer. We're as interested in anybody in making sure that this comes to reality. And you can pull any scenario that I mentioned to you on those threats to space capabilities and space domain from all other domains to see why we got to tie it all together in an awareness that allows us to operate at the speed of war.
Absolutely. Thank you for helping us understand that a little bit better. You mentioned the DepSecDef, so we've got just a little bit of time for one more question. With the increase of commercial actors in space in this third space age, and given the Deputy Secretary Hicks' recent comments regarding indemnification, right, and the Vice President's policy commentary about on-orbit refueling, active debris removal, and on-orbit manufacturing, there's no doubt that the use of commercial space is going to continue to grow, right, in new ways that we can't even envision yet. What do you see as U.S. Space Command's role when it comes to keeping the domain safe for commercial viability?
Yeah, so I know we're getting short on time. I'll just be quick with some thoughts here, Kim. First of all, this is a great thing. We all want and need, as a society, as a planet, for commercial space to succeed. You know, in all human endeavors in the past, in any development of any frontiers, yes, there was exploration involved, analogous to our civil space, and yes, there were security issues involved in terms of understanding threats on borders. But it was always economics and commerce that drove the engine of evolution and sustainment in any of those frontiers. And I think the same it'll be the same for space. I'll briefly just let everybody know if they didn't already. You know, we actually have, U.S. Space Command has in the Unified Command Plan, which is our mission set from the president. There is explicit language in there. It says that when directed, we will protect commercial space capabilities. That shouldn't surprise anybody. That's the same in other domains. That's absolute same in other domains. And a big role that we play is to make sure, as best we can, that there's transparency in the space domain, that there's awareness of threats, whether those are natural as we do today, or maybe to commerce in the future, or you know, non-natural threats that are intentional, and being aware and making others aware of that, and by doing so, incentivizing continued economic investment in the space domain.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, General Shaw, for sharing your insights today about all of the things that we need to do to make sure that we are, in fact, safeguarding and securing the heavens, right? As we see this continued growth in the space domain and the vitality that space provides to our economy, to our way of life, and in fact, to our way of work, to JADC2. As you pointed out, space is critical to JADC2, and all the other domains that are a part of JADC2 are critical to space, and we've got to keep it protected and keep it secure. Thank you again for being here. It's really a pleasure to see you. It's an honor to join you in this chat, and thank you for all of you do. Thank you for the leadership of U.S. Space Command for keeping space transparent, for protecting and defending our assets, and for ensuring that safe transition of space traffic management to the Department of Commerce so that they can fulfill their vital role in helping to secure the heavens, helping to protect each of the space sectors in this conjunction of space as we continue to advance in the third age of space.
All right. Thanks, Kim. Great to spend time with you. We'll see you again soon. Thanks.